I used to be a vegan. I'm just not convinced that's going to work anymore.
Philosophy YouTuber and ex-vegan Alex O'Connor says he's not convinced veganism will work, but what if it already is working? And what if turning your back on it means turning your back on one of the most effective tools that we have to help animals? Honestly, Alex has some strong moments in this video, but then he makes a move that could completely undermine the change he wants to see. So let's get into his video, and I'll show you exactly where it all comes apart.
When you start looking at how we actually treat animals, I mean, how do you feel about, factory farming, for example? How do you feel about the way that we get our food?
I would hate to say it's a somewhat necessary evil.
Necessary for what?
Feeding people. I would love to see maybe something more sustainable. I know crickets have been, talked about quite a lot, doing cricket protein.
There's also more sustainable versions of the same foods we're already eating, or less torturous. I mean, for example, in my country, over 80% of pigs that are reared for food are in gas chambers. Carbon dioxide, they're lowered in cages into chambers of carbon dioxide, where you can watch the footage of this online. It's not just putting them to sleep. Now, we do actually know that there are other gases we can use that would be less painful, that they wouldn't cause them to squeal around, choking on their own breath. Invisible gas as well, so they probably just only adds to the confusion. Just an unimaginable cruelty for these animals. Now, maybe it's the case that for whatever reason, we need to be pigs for food. We need bacon, we need it for whatever reason. If that's the case, which is dubious already, why don't we use another gas which is less painful? Well, because it's more expensive.
This right here is the part most people never realize. When we talk about pigs being gassed to death, it's not because it's the only way to do it. It's not because it's the most humane. It's because it's cheap. That's it. Not health, not necessity, just profit. These companies aren't thinking, how can we feed people ethically? They're thinking, how do we keep this as cheap as possible so people keep buying it without asking too many questions? And if they used a slightly less painful gas, it'd cost more. And if it costs more, people might also start thinking about what they're actually paying for, and fewer people will buy it. Your awareness is a real threat to these companies.
It's sort of like, when you say it's a necessary evil, it might be necessary to kill animals for food. It might be necessary to rear maybe even lots of animals for food. And it may be necessary sometimes not to treat them ideally because of the amount of food that we need. But the current practices of factory farming are sort of beyond the pale.
Here's a point most meat eaters and vegans tend to agree on. Factory farming is horrific. Full stop. But there's a catch that a lot of people don't think through. If you want to get rid of factory farming, there'll be a massive drop in supply. You can't just pull the plug on factory farming and keep bacon at the same price. It's estimated that without factory farming, people would have to reduce their consumption of things like meat, dairy, and eggs by about 70% just to meet demand using these more ethical methods. It wouldn't be possible to produce as much as people consume now without factory farming. If you're a meat eater, would you be willing to reduce your consumption by 70% to help get rid of factory farming? And is that ask more convincing to you than the usual go vegan messaging from animal advocates? Let me know down in the comments.
So what do you think is a solution for that practice of farming?
Well,
is there one? Is it even possible to humanely breed and raise animals for farming?
Well, humane is a tricky word to use there because, of course, to the extent that you're unnecessarily an animal, it's difficult to describe that as humane. I certainly think that if the industry is going to change, I used to be a vegan, and I used to think that the solution to this was just to not eat the products, to not pay for the products. It's essentially a boycott. Boycotts work, at least sometimes. Boycotts can be effective. And for a time, veganism was really beginning to take off. It seemed like it was really changing the world, and you become really convinced that the world one day will actually be vegan, that morality will catch up on the world, and in the same way that all kind of other injustices like human slavery are abolished, the same thing will happen with animal exploitation. By the way, more human beings are in slavery today than were at the height of the transatlantic slave trade. It's just that at least now we condemn it and try to root it out. I'm just not convinced that's going to work anymore.
This point about slavery is kind of misleading, in my opinion. Yes, more people are enslaved globally today than during the transatlantic slave trade, but a huge part of the reason that slavery is still abolished in the West is moral conviction. That same conviction created laws, and those laws hold because most people continue to believe that slavery is wrong. If people didn't care anymore, you'd see it come back. So if Alex is hinting at the argument that, well, slavery still exists, therefore veganism won't work, I'm not sure that holds. If anything, it shows that when people care enough, change does happen and it can last.
I don't think that people will stop eating animals, and I don't think that it's wrong in the way that I used to in principle, because you sort of, the big end of the funnel when it comes to veganism is factory farming footage. You know, you show people, I talk just how I've spoken to you now about these abominable practices, and so you say, okay, I want to do something about this, and then maybe you become a vegan, and then there's a lot of debate about, well, what if we kill the animals in a different way? What if I've got backyard chicken farming? And there's a big discussion. What if I've got chickens in my back garden? What if I eat their eggs? Can that be a problem? And people will still say, well, okay, they've still been selectively bred to lay more eggs than they would naturally, which often gives them a calcium deficiency, which leads to things like osteoporosis in chickens, which is bad, but it's nowhere near as bad or as as much of an emergency as factory farming, right? And so suddenly you're having these much more sort of nuanced debates about animal ethics, about what you have the right to do, because you've first you've gotten through the door with the obvious stuff.
Now, this is where things get a bit blurry for me and where his arguments start to fall apart, in my opinion. He's saying that because vegans debate things like backyard chicken eggs, that's somehow evidence that veganism doesn't work or won't work. That's like saying medicine won't work because doctors disagree on which treatment is best. Ethical debates are part of any mature movement. If we all agreed on everything, we'd be a cult. Debating edge cases doesn't make the core ideas any less valid. If anything, it means we're taking it very seriously by exploring these different concepts and ideas and being open to other perspectives that could help animals.
The first thing we need to do is convince people of the obvious stuff. This is inexcusable. There's no excuse for the way that we are sort of treating pigs in factory farms at the moment. There's simply no excuse. If this is the only way to produce bacon to the extent that we currently eat it, then eat less. Right? It's just not even close. It makes a parody of ethics. The solution, I think, needs to be something like what happened with the environmentalist movement. You remember sort of 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, everybody's saying, make sure you switch off your lights, make sure you don't leave the tap running, because if you leave that running for a year, it can fill up an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And so you're sort of doing your little bit. And then people begin to realize, actually, that's not really solving the problem. What we need to do is we need to go and lobby Shell to stop whatever the hell it is that Shell do. We need to stop governments from investing in fuel licenses. We need to get universities to divest their investments in fossil fuel industries, for example. It's much more now about protesting authority and trying to make systematic change happening from the top down. And now the idea of the environmentalist, whose principal focus is trying to convince people to remember to turn their lights off, kind of seems almost a bit silly. It's really, that's going to solve the problem? Well, maybe, yeah, sure. If everybody did that, maybe we'd have less of a problem. But the way to do this is clearly systematic top-down change. And I think the same thing maybe needs to happen with veganism. I'm not entirely sure about this. I'm open to be convinced either way. But I think that whereas people might have said, we just need to stop eating these products, maybe it's now actually, no, let's go and lobby the government to make this a criminal offense.
I don't think this analogy works, and I'll show you where I think this falls apart. Turning off your lights or a tap, that's a drop in the ocean. Energy companies don't go bankrupt because you took shorter showers. But when people stop buying meat, dairy, or eggs, when they put their money into animal-free products, that hits these industries really hard. They lose market share. And that's why they're suddenly invested in oat milk, vegan sausages, and animal-free burgers. It's not because they care. It's because you took your money elsewhere. And that is how personal action drives systemic change. And here's something else that I think makes this analogy weak. If you turn off a light or turn off the tap, the power company and the water company are not trying to desperately figure out where you spent the money elsewhere. They don't see your action or feel its impact directly. But when you stop buying animal products and you put your money into the animal-free alternatives, you're not just reducing something abstract like water use or electricity use. You're actively sending a signal to these industries of where the profit is going. You're telling them, this is the future. Animal-free products are the future. That's what I'm spending my money on. Follow it or get left behind. That's why the meat industry reacts to vegan trends with panic. It's why fast food giants are now having animal-free burgers and animal-free options. Even without a single law passed, if enough people stop buying, animal agriculture industries will change to protect their profits. And we've already been seeing this happen. Combine that with protest, pressure from both below and above, and suddenly the industries are getting cornered. Protest is powerful, but protest without financial impact, it's mostly just noise. But public outcry and hitting their bottom line, That's the recipe for rapid, large-scale change. And here's something else to think about. Even if you put the strategy talk to one side for a moment, what does it actually say about us if we pay for animals to be gassed, mutilated, and killed just because we like the taste? If it's unnecessary and we know it's cruel, and we still choose to fund it, what kind of moral character is that revealing? We shouldn't just change because it works tactically. We should also change because it's the right thing to do. And as for encouraging people to do the right thing, isn't it good to encourage people to be good?
Now, how would that differ with crickets? Because let's just say one cow could feed 10 people versus 10,000 crickets.
Yeah.
Feeding the same 10 people, and like 10,000 crickets have to and be kept in like, you know, in their own filth and this and that. Like, how would it differ from the perspective of just suffering life?
It's going to depend on your view of like consciousness of crickets, right? Because intuitively, I want to say that a cow is worth much more than a cricket. Many more crickets are worth the same as a cow, but that's a very difficult thing to quantify. It's like when we actually try to put a number on it, it's impossible. Like, how many cows would you save one dog? Like, man, I don't know, like 3.5. Like, who knows, right?
Yeah. The correct answer is 1.75.
right. Yeah. I think that the cricket thing is interesting, right? Because what's the solution? You know, if we're not eating cows, what if we're going to eat thousands of crickets? Well, look, why not let's start by like eating cows, but not rearing them on factory farms? How about that? Why don't we sort of try to create more organic ways of farming these animals, at least as a start, right? Like, in other words, there are not two options. If you really don't want to do away with the eating of animal products, it's not like your only options are forcing pigs into gas chambers or eating thousands of locusts. There's sort of a middle ground to be had there, right? And so what I'm saying here is, for a start at least, systematic governmental change. It should be a criminal offense to do all kinds of things that are currently legal. Because, by the way, the things I'm describing here are legal.
So let's talk about incrementalism. This is the idea that we make small changes that slowly improve on an issue rather than trying to uproot the entire system all at once. Alex suggests, what if we just made farming less torturous as a start? So let's just do away with the factory farming and those problems and maybe eat cows in a better way. And honestly, that is how most big ethical shifts happen. Slavery abolition started with small reforms, things like better conditions and limits on trade. Slaves were seen as essential. People didn't just disagree. They thought abolition was radical, fringe, dangerous to the economy. So instead, the people against slavery pushed for better treatment and limits on trade and some of these things that are related more to the conditions. It's not because they didn't want full abolition, but it's because they knew they couldn't get it all at once. So what did they do? Well, they chipped away step by step until public sentiment shifted enough to finish the job and get it abolished. And if that's how it had to be done for humans, with all the empathy and legal rights we already grant to humans, do we really think the road to ending animal exploitation will be faster or cleaner? We're almost certainly going to have to walk a similar path, fighting for these incremental changes while holding on to that ultimate goal of a world where we no longer do this to animals at all. And look, just like then, both slaves and animals, they deserve to be free from all of this violence. They both deserve for us to stand on principle. But in practice, especially early on, it might be better for them that we hold abolitionist views privately while acting in a way that makes incremental change possible publicly. Saying all that though, I was genuinely surprised that at this part of the conversation, when they're talking about the different options you could choose, that none of them brought up the elephant or the tofu in the room: animal-free diets. We've got thousands of plant-based foods, from legumes to seitan, vegan cheese to oat milk, and it's never been easier. Now, Alex has cited personal health issues as to why he won't eat an animal-free diet. To be clear, those issues predated his vegan diet, and from what I understand, he didn't seek proper nutritional support to help with those issues. I mean, that's probably why he's not raising the third option of simply choosing animal-free food, but this context matters, because for most people, eating an animal-free diet doesn't mean choosing between ethics and health. It means both. You could eat a tasty, nutritious, animal-free diet that doesn't require funding all the horrors Alex has been describing in this video so far. And that third option should absolutely have been on the table in this discussion.
And most factory farms aren't even following the regulations. You know, every single time somebody breaks in with a camera, puts a camera on the side of a factory farm and like exposes what's going on, it's so much worse. It's so much worse. And I'm describing what you can legally do. And that's if everybody's following the rules. People like Joey Carbstrong for years have been breaking into farms at, I suppose, quite considerable risk and putting cameras on the side and showing people what happens. And it's not nice. And so at the very least, this kind of stuff should be a criminal offence. Yeah. In the UK, you have to stun an animal before you can kill it. It's a legal requirement that you have to stun an animal before you kill it for food. Now, the UK government considers gas chambers to be a form of stunning at the same time, if you like, two birds with one stone, or two pigs in one gas chamber. And so this practice is allowed where, like, if the pig didn't die, it might well be illegal because you've just sort of gassed a pig and it hasn't died. And also if you just like that pig without stunning it, you'd have committed a criminal offence.
I've actually got a lot of respect for Alex here. Calling for the criminalisation of some factory farming practices, especially when most of your audience likely supports those very practices, is bold, to say the least. But I do have a problem with his idea of strategy, because legislation doesn't lead culture, culture leads legislation. Governments generally don't outlaw things their voters want. And most voters still support animal agriculture and industrial animal agriculture. So if you want legal change, you're going to need to change the culture first. And that means we have to convince people to stop funding this violence to animals, to start making changes in their lives, and then to vote for people who will apply pressure on these industries. And just as a factual note, Alex says animals must be stunned before slaughter in the UK. But that's not always true. Religious exemptions allow for slaughter without stunning under halal and kosher practices. So even the most basic protections for animals aren't consistently applied, which is a huge issue. Not only are animal welfare laws not properly enforced, they're undermined for religious sentiment. This is another reason we need the public to be morally motivated and on board, both in their consumer actions and voting behavior.
So there's this argument called name the trait, which is used in the context of animal ethics, which is to say, give me the thing that's true of a pig or a cow, that if it were true of a human, you'd be okay with a human for food. Right? So people say, well, we kill animals because they're less intelligent than us. So we'll take a human being and make them less intelligent. Actually, Thomas Jefferson wrote about this. He was responding to a review, I think, of a book that had been published around the time of the American Revolution about the intellectual and artistic achievements of black people. Somebody had written a book detailing all kinds of achievements that were done, that were made by black people. And I suppose the implication was to be like, look what people are capable of. You should think differently about black people. And Thomas Jefferson wrote a response to this and said, no one's happier than I am to see this kind of thing. But we should not fool ourselves into thinking that this is any indication of their worth. I mean, just because Isaac Newton was more intelligent than, my mother, does that mean that he has more of a right to life, to not be abused, to not be killed? No, of course not. And in other words, intelligence is not a metric to determine your moral worth. But if that's the case, then when somebody says, well, pigs are less intelligent than us, okay, so what? Okay, so what is it then? Like, is it, oh, well, pigs are less self-aware? Okay, well, you can make a human less self-aware as well. You can imagine like a cognitively disabled human being. You can essentially start transforming a human being into a pig. Mm-hmm. You can give the human 4 legs. Is it okay to put him in a gas chamber now? No. Okay, well, let's lower the human's intelligence level. Definitely not. We definitely don't want to be putting people in gas chambers based on their intelligence level, do we? Okay, what if we give them a curly tail? How about now? Like, no. Okay, but you're slowly turning this human into a pig, and you get to a point where that human is now identical to the pig, and yet you still are like, no, it's still not okay to put them in the gas chamber. But that's what we're doing over here to this identical creature, So it's actually very difficult to determine what.
That's very interesting.
It's like the biggest challenge, but because one of the reasons it's such a big challenge is because on another level, like a human is worth more than the pig. Like people just sort of intuitively know this. Now, I'm an emotivist about ethics. I think that when people make ethical judgments, they're just expressing emotions, and so I think it's got a lot to do with how many genes you share with people, and so I think that really it's got to do with like how much that pig kind of resembles a human to you. That's going to determine like how much you in fact value that pig. That's not a moral claim. That's not a justified. I think that's just what's happening. But if you start trying to say that no, actually, I think that a pig is worth less than a human, and I think that a dog is worth more than a rat, and I ask you why, whatever reason you give, all you've got to do is apply that to a human being and see if that's actually the reason, you know? And a lot of the time you find that it's not.
He makes a great point here. Why do we care more about dogs than pigs? It's definitely not logical. People connect with dogs, don't connect with cows. But if you spend time with rescued pigs or cows, you learn to see their personalities, their quirks, their bonds. You see them play, feel joy, and grieve. The real reason we don't care, it's not intelligence, it's convenience. We've been taught not to connect, but that's something we can undo. And once we break that barrier, once we meet these animals properly, once we learn how much they feel, how their emotions, how they feel pain and can suffer and feel joy and happiness, just like our dogs and cats and pets, you'll never see them as food again. You'll look at the products in the supermarket and you'll connect with the animal, not the product. Alex might have walked away from veganism, but the truth he helped expose about animals, including what he outlines in this video, these are truths that are still there. And they aren't going away unless we do something about it. I'm glad to see Alex raising serious, valid concerns about factory farming, but when he suggests that individual change doesn't matter, or that debate among vegans somehow undermines the whole cause, that's where the arguments fall apart for me. Systems don't change unless people change, and culture doesn't shift unless individuals start showing that it's possible to live differently. That's why veganism matters, not just as a tactic, but as a moral stance. The good thing is that principle and strategy are aligned here. Choosing animal-free products isn't just the right thing to do, it also builds the cultural momentum we need to push this real, long-lasting change. So if you're already questioning factory farming, don't stop there. Keep going. Because when the only justification left is, I like how it tastes, we have to ask, is that really enough? If it wouldn't justify hurting a dog, a cat, or a child even, why should it justify hurting them? Try to think about this from the animal's perspective. Think about what they feel, what they go through, and what it means when we pay for their suffering. If animals don't deserve gas chambers, maybe they don't deserve to be food either.